With me now, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Mike Rogers. Let me begin with something that the Iranians were quite fixed on during the course of these negotiations, and that was the idea of whether or not they have a right to an enrichment program, which they say would just be for nuclear power, for peaceful reasons. And I want to play you something that the Iranian foreign minister had to say, and this was after the deal was announced.
We believe that the current agreement, the current plan of action, as we call it, in two distinct places, has a very clear reference to the fact that Iranian enrichment program will continue and will be a part of any agreement, now and in the future.
Whoa. Now, I must say that the Secretary of State said, now people are going to tell you that there's, written in here the right to enrichment, and there isn't. So already they disagree on what the agreement said, which is kind of the point, I guess, of...
We have just rewarded very bad and dangerous behavior. So think about what this agreement does. It says you can continue to enrich, that's what the Iranians believe, and they have made no changes in the development of their nuclear weapon program, and I can tell you that with a high degree of certainty. So here is the leading nation-state of terror who tried to commit a political assassination right here in Washington, D.C., they believe, have contributed to the deaths of hundreds of U.S. soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan, who continues to be the main driver between the incredible brutality that's happening in Syria, very active around the world with other political assassination attempts. And what have we done? We've taken away the one thing, we've given them just enough breathing room, the one thing that brought them to the table. What's worried about that is bipartisan opposition in Congress, very strong bipartisan opposition to the deal. Our Arab League partners don't like the deal. Israel doesn't like the deal. And we may have just encouraged more violence in the future than we have stopped. That's why I hope we reconsider where we're at, certainly in 6 months.
Well, you're right, because the deal is there, and there's not much Congress can do at this particular point because it's a deal. I think the question, though, is that they are freezing much of their program, at any rate. They are, if we are to believe this plan, allowing unprecedented access to at least some of its reactor sites, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to play you something that John Kerry said in advance of the criticism he knew was coming. Mm-hmm.
Finally, I know that there are those who will assert that this deal is imperfect. Well, they too bear a responsibility, and that is to tell people what the better alternative is.
Gladly. The president opposed the first round of sanctions. They worked on Iran. Congressionally mandated sanctions on Iran passed with huge bipartisan support. The second round of sanctions passed with huge bipartisan support. This was the third round. And what we are finally starting to do is start to impact the elite in Iran, the business class of Iran. And what they've done, now remember, they're overburdened. They're active. They're supporting Hezbollah, a terrorist organization operating in Syria. They've got all of these pressures. And finally, we were getting to the place that was actually going to really bite. And they were going to have to make the determination, is a nuclear weapon worth the destruction of our country financially? What they have just done is stopped this second round. And what's frustrating to me about this, Candy, is they spent the last month lobbying Congress not about what the deal would be or wouldn't be, but please don't do another round of sanctions. That tells me they don't understand what capabilities they have now and what they're seeking to do, and that's dangerous.
Well, Julie, good to have you here today because you have a fascinating story on the wires today. You report that the U.S. and Iran have been involved for the last year in secret, high-level talks. One, what was going on, and two, how big a role did those talks play in leading up to this weekend's agreement?
Well, this is a story that I've been working on with two great colleagues of mine, Matt Lee and Brad Clapper, since March. March is when we were first tipped off that the U.S. and Iran had been having a high-level meeting in Oman. And that meeting happened critically before Rouhani, the more moderate cleric, was elected. We subsequently learned that there were 4 other meetings that happened after Rouhani was elected over the course of this fall. And those are the meetings that really laid the groundwork for this agreement agreement that we saw last night. It was in these meetings that some of the details were actually discussed between the U.S. and Iran, and that's the deal that actually was then brought to the P5 talks. And a lot of the allies were surprised in some way that this deal seemed to come together a little more quickly than maybe they expected, and that's in large part because these meetings had already happened.
All right, let's get to the deal.
But what I think would happen is if you have all this fissile material, then you give it to a terrorist group, and they have a series of suitcase bombs, and that could terrify and paralyze the world without creating a nuclear cloud over Jerusalem. And it's really a deeply troubling thing.
It is.